Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and hello everyone. Welcome once more to the first edition of the eTourism Revolution Talks, an exchange hub to discuss the future of tourism, usually in a short format, composed by powerful talks from experts around the world. This session is part of the Safe Traveler series, where we bring top global innovators to give us their advice and guidance into their areas of expertise. Welcome to this fantastic talk. I'm your host, Abdul Sacoor. Today, I'm honored to have Brandon and Amery in our show. Welcome both.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Can you take each one of you, please, a minute just to introduce yourselves, what you do, and where you are based?
My name's Amery Burleigh, and I am the general manager of Movenpick Jumeirah Beach in Dubai. And so I've been in the hospitality industry my whole life. I'm from a very small town in California that many people know called Carmel. And there are more tourists there than there are, anywhere else. The whole town is based on tourism. So it's kind of in my blood. And I've been working with luxury hotels all around the world, from Four Seasons to Sofitel to Fairmont Hotels, and now in Dubai with Movenpick. So my background's food and beverage, love food and beverage, and that's why I love this brand. Is we have our own fine foods division. So I did do a stint in health and well-being at a luxury health retreat. So I found I really am passionate about health and well-being, and so this new safety, traveling in safe and healthy times is actually something I'm really passionate about.
Thank you very much, Amery. So I think we've chosen the right guests for this show. Brandon, please.
Thanks, Amery, and Salam alaikum, Abdul, and everybody else. Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are. Amery, I'm just up the road from you in Dubai also, so we'll have to catch up for a coffee. My background is principally in technology and principally in aviation. My role at the present is I'm the CEO of a company called Aeroban, and my previous role I was global CTO of the world's largest processor for aviation tickets. We used to process about $250 billion of tickets a year, and I saw an opportunity to introduce blockchain, artificial intelligence to try and make the industry more profitable for the airlines. In 2019, the industry made an average of about 3% profit, the airline industry, which was pre-COVID. So you can only imagine the harm that's happened since COVID. So a lot of folks are asking us how we, manage costs, how do we collaborate as a community and create a community economy. So that's one of our big objectives, is to do that in passenger and in cargo. And thanks for having me.
I look forward to hear more. No problem. I look forward to hear more about it, Brandon. Before we start, there is a small echo. Maybe if any one of you has a device which is connected, like a mobile, can you please switch off because of the sound? I can hear some echo.
Okay. Stop now.
Okay, yeah, perfect. Now it's better. Okay, thank you very much. So yeah, I would like maybe to start about talking about certification. Amery, Accor has launched the Cleanliness and Prevention All Safe, which is a global cleanliness and prevention standards label developed and vetted by the Bureau Veritas, a world leader in testing, inspections, and certification. What can guests expect when staying at one of the Accor hotels?
Well, Accor has, they partnered with Bureau Veritas as well as Johns Hopkins University in the United States. And they wanted a worldwide solution and a worldwide set of standards that we could implement on a consistent level. Because all of the surveys that we've been doing lately, roughly 69 to 75% of people state safety while traveling as their #1 priority right now. So every brand is looking at safety and putting in different protocols. And what Accor wanted to do was make sure that we had something that we could certify a hotel. And it's very rigorous. It's there is kind of uncompromising. So you have to, the system in order to be certified is even higher than if we just went with Bureau Veritas. We've taken it to the next level. And then each country, of course, has different governments. So we're very fortunate here in the UAE, where the government has taken a very active and engaged stance on health and safety from the very beginning of this pandemic. And I can say that our protocols in place and the expectations for hotels throughout Dubai is very strong and very consistent. And we're very proud of that. I think Dubai has just received a new worldwide certification from the World Travel and Tourism Council saying that we are a safe destination. So we're really excited about that certification. But All Safe is for hotels in particular. So there are, with change like this, there are always going to be pros and cons. And the pros are that you know that you're checking into a safe environment. And the importance of this safety is not just for our guests, but also for our staff and our team members, because we're dealing with people from all over the world. And as we all know, and we hear on the news, and of course, being American, I'm very embarrassed by some of the news I hear out of America about how different countries are handling it. So every person that walks through the door, we want to ensure that they are safe and that they practice good safety measures in line with what's expected here. Now, we reopened the hotel at the end of June, and I can say that it's been an interesting experience, and we've had direct feedback from guests already. And what's interesting is the level of expectations really do depend on where the guest is from. So if they are local, they feel very safe. They know that we have very strict protocols in place. They can see, staff are wearing gloves. Everybody's got the mask on. They know what the law is. There's so many consistent inspections and audits done by the government of hotels and restaurants and businesses. So there is a real level of consistency, and I might say ease of those travelers. But we've started to welcome some European travelers. And we, kind of depending on where they're from, they don't have to wear masks where they've come from. So they arrived to Dubai. Now, I think it was announced today that everybody arriving to Dubai will have a test done at the airport. And so we think that's a positive thing. They can get the results very quickly. And I'm sure that they're given a mask because it is the law in Dubai. You have to wear a mask. And if you're caught without one, there's roughly a $900 fine. So we want to make sure that our guests are aware of these things. Now, when they check into the hotel, it's super clean. It's sparkling clean. And you'll see little like public area fairies walking around, disinfecting all your door handles and rails and anything you might touch regularly. Bathrooms, instead of being cleaned once an hour, are cleaned every 20 minutes. So you can see that there's a level of real care and concern about cleanliness taken. Some of the other positives are that we've gone digital. So there's not a big menu. There's, things that take up room on the table. Everything's, a quick little QR code, and you have access to all the different menus in the hotel. Now, we've also taken that into the rooms. And this is maybe where there's been a little bit of a challenge, is the communication standpoint. So the positives are that there's more communication available to the guests. It's super clean. There's lots of reminders. So when the guest comes in, there's stickers on the floor and stickers on the door and stickers on walls and stickers on lifts and elevators, that there's lots of reminders of what to do and how to behave. So you don't have to know what the rules are before, because we've made it very easy to follow the rules. And that's part of the All Safe program and some of the protocols. Some of the challenges have been that the guest expectation of a 5-star hotel room are a little bit, are not necessarily met in the same way. One of the protocols that came out from the government here in the UAE was to reduce the amount of things that are touched in the room. So an iron and an ironing board that used to be standard in every closet now has been taken out because it's not something that you can cover in plastic and sanitize. So it's done on request, and so that when it arrives to the room, you know that it's been sanitized completely. They've asked that we remove mini bars. So the refrigerator is still there and people can use it for their own things, but anything that a previous guest could touch and leave behind has been removed. We've done things like, one of the challenges, honestly, is that all this sanitization and all of these protocols are not necessarily environmentally friendly, because you have to communicate with people that this has been sanitized, and you have to cover things. And so we've seen that there's the challenge of, we've been working for years and years to be sustainable, and now we're seeing more plastic in the room. So, and then we have everything available in the room. We have everything that was in the room available. It's just that there's now an additional menu if there's something besides shampoo, conditioner, lotion, and soap. So the things that every guest is pretty much going to use are in the room. And then if the guest doesn't use those are taken out and thrown away. There is no way that we could leave anything in the room that could have been touched by the previous guest. So linens are sanitized, sheets are sanitized. We work very closely with our suppliers. So you come into the room and it's a little less cluttered. And that's, I think, what's been the biggest challenge. Valet parking. We weren't allowed to do valet parking because for the safety of the guests and the safety of the team, we couldn't get into somebody else's car not knowing whether they were safe or not. So this has been a challenge, especially in a place like Dubai where all the cars are parked for you. So there's little adjustments that people are going to get used to, but in the early days that as hotels are just opening up now and is starting to accept travelers again, there's going to be an adjustment period. And we are seeing that in the feedback, and we're seeing people be a little bit frustrated. But when we explain that this is 100% for your safety and for your security and well-being, then they go, oh, okay, I guess. And they can understand that maybe they're being a little bit demanding. So that's probably what you're going to expect, is some changes when you walk through the door. But if we can just focus on the positive, that you're in a safe environment when you're in an Accor hotel or a certified hotel, because the protocols are so strict.
Yeah, definitely. I would perfectly agree with that, because that's what the guest wants nowadays. Safety in the first place. And all the protocols you just mentioned in a very detailed way. We really appreciate that, because every guest wants to be and feel safe. One of the things that I've realized as well of the Bureau Veritas is the training that you give to the staff, right? Are they actually all the mechanisms in place for staff to receive the guests in a proper way, with all the uniforms, and also giving the guidance that they have to the guests?
Yes, training is a very important part of it, because you need that consistency. So there's classroom style training. We did Accor rolled out a worldwide online training, so that it's in a number of different languages, so that all of this team, so they have online training and then they have hands-on training. And so we go into a room with small teams of housekeepers, or we go into a restaurant with a restaurant team, and we go step by step of every single step that they have to take. And, for instance, it kind of the worldwide standard for cleaning a basic one room, not a suite or anything, a basic room worldwide standards around 30 to 35 minutes for a 5-star hotel. And we have now, and so housekeeper might do 14, 15 rooms in a day. And now we can see that productivity has dropped drastically. So now we're doing 12 rooms a day because there are so many more steps that in general, they'd wipe things down. But now that extra step of sanitization is so important, and you cannot compromise on it. And so it's cost more. And so, as hotels, we're looking down the window of less profitability in order to provide a safe environment. And sometimes guests don't see that. So if 70% of people think safety is important, 70% of the people that walk through the door are going to appreciate all these steps. But maybe 25 to 30% are like, where's my iron? Where's my mini bar? Where's this? Where's my toothbrush? They're not going to have that same level of appreciation. But training, absolutely, it's because you have to have the consistency.
Yeah, definitely. I think it will be a little bit balanced. I mean, people want to travel, but also need to be pampered and also need to be taken care of. So I think it's an interesting mix. There will be always, some people that have different opinions in terms of adjustment. What about which type of guidelines do you give to guests when they go out of the hotel just for a few hours and they come back?
So we offer guests, obviously we make sure they wear a mask, and we make sure they know, do not take off the mask, and you have to actually put it over your nose. Don't just wear it under your chin because of the fines. And they're very strict here. We very compliant society, but our guests need to know that. We also offer them gloves if that makes them feel more comfortable. And then we remind them that most places have introduced QR codes to make sure that they understand you can just use your camera for that. You don't need a QR code reader, that it's that life is really simple right now, but to please maintain social distancing, and that here the government's not afraid to fine you. So there's been some nice famous stories of big fines going out for lack of social distancing and lack of following the rules. So we do make sure that our people are informed. And in general, so far, we've only had local guests and a few Europeans. So the few Europeans have been very concerned about safety. And so they've been happy to have some direction, and I think everybody's a little bit unsure what traveling means right now. And so having somebody kind of handhold through the first few steps of their first travel COVID, post-COVID, I think they're feeling reassured about that. So it's just being human and being kind and saying, look, it's different for all of us, but we're in this together, so let's just make it the best we can.
Definitely. In terms of events, how are you managing, like business events at the hotel? Are you doing in a smaller scale or in a stage way? What is the guidance?
Well, I'm actually happy to say that we have been very lucky. We have had one of the Accor Group's first business meetings. We've had our first social dinner, like a banquet, and we've had our first entertainment event. And so we last week we did. It's called Laughter Factory, and so we usually do 500 or 600 guests, and it's all sitting very close together, and it's for a comedy show, and so they came to us and they said, look, we're dying to bring some entertainment to Dubai, and we've got this great lineup of these comedians out of the UK. What do you think? And we said, well, we can do it with social distancing, and at last week we had to serve. Alcohol couldn't be served without food. So I said, let's make it a dinner, a dinner comedy show, dinner and drinks comedy show. And so we took our huge ballroom, and so where we could normally have 600 people, we had 150, and we had taken 4 because that's kind of the limit you're supposed to have. And we had tables of 4 spread out with the 2-meter distance. And we served dinner before the show, and then and as many drinks as they could possibly get. Then the first part show went on, and then we did the second part of the show. And you know what? Everybody had a great time. There were just as many laughs.
Kudos for that. Great.
Same thing with a dinner. So we have a large round table with only 5 guests on the table instead of 10. And then the tables are set apart. But service, we don't do buffets right now because that's off the list of allowed services. And so we're doing family style to the table. So there's a little bit more interaction. There's a little bit more service. And then business meetings for the morning tea and afternoon tea breaks, we still set it up as individual portions. So one guest would never touch anything that another guest would have, and we spread it out. So if you were normally have one table with all of your goodies on it, we had 6 tables, and they could socially spread out, and they could just take 1 or 2 individual items in like little cups and little tiny plates, and they could take them and gather. So we're providing everything in the right way. And we asked for feedback. We said, what did you think? How did it go? And they said, we know we're safe. Now, of course, they didn't socially distance, but that's their choice. So it's actually easier to provide. Everybody realizes this is short-term pain for long-term gain, and that we'll get through this. And right now, it's all about their safety.
Absolutely, absolutely. And by the way, Amery, where is your hotel located exactly in Dubai?
In Jumeirah Beach. So the Jumeirah Beach residence is a very popular leisure destination. But we have a big ballroom, so we do meetings and events, and so it's we're a very popular wedding destination. So weddings aren't officially now allowed, but so many people have been waiting to get married for the last 4 months. We're starting to get space for dinners. And so they're having a dinner event, and you're allowed to have 1 entertainer. So it's, do we call it a wedding? It is a wedding reception, but it's just in a very low key, nice way.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think at least the processes are in place, and all the advice is given. I think you're absolutely on track. And it's been really fabulous to see how Accor is actually managing all the process and taking care of the guests. There's something really, really amazing. I would like now to maybe focus a little bit more about reopening the borders for some countries to allow tourists and travelers to visit, whilst mitigating the risk of the COVID-19 for travel staff and locals. So, Brendan, please talk me more about the Safe Tourism program.
Okay, and thanks, Amery, for a good coverage there of the in-country. Because what I'm going to talk to is how we get the people into the country. And obviously, when they land, then there's also the regime of making sure that everybody's safe, both local and visitors. Amery, could I ask you to switch off your microphone? I think there's feedback. I'm hearing a lot of feedback, if you don't mind. Thank you. A bit disconcerting hearing myself. So basically, we're talking to a number of countries about how to safely open. And Amery touched on some really good points about, look, folks have to get back to normal. You can't postpone your weddings forever. And we're a social species, and we need to reintegrate and react. We've got businesses, economies, and tourism is the backbone of so many countries. And we've had countries come to us and say, we just have to open. We have seen on the downside, we have seen some countries move too fast. They've driven the process by an economic decision rather than rely on the clinically led scientific decisions. And there's been a couple of countries that have probably gone a little bit too fast. And I think Greece is one example where they're reconsidering, how to set up that testing regime. I know Amery mentioned that there's testing on arrival into Dubai, and that makes a lot of sense. So there's clinically led way of doing this. Now, I'm a technologist, I'm not a clinician, but in the last 2 months, I've learned a lot of lessons from the folks we're working with, the clinicians and the digital health experts. So we're working hand in glove, but they lead, we support, we buttress those decisions with, financially buttressed and technologically buttressed, so that it's led by the clinicians themselves. And there are testing regimes, and we see a lot of mentions about rapid tests on, headlines as a rapid 10-minute test. The problem is, if I just sort of, maybe Abdul, I just basically go through the testing landscape, because there are quite big differences in the types of tests that are out there. And again, I'm a layman here, but I've learned a lot in the last few months, and I'd love to share it. There's basically, you have your antibody tests, you have your antigen tests, and you have your PCR tests. And the antibody tests are tests to look for what they call as IgM or IgG antibodies, which are indicators that you've had the virus. Now, there's been a lot of speculation around this, and nobody really knows if you've had the virus and you have antibodies, are you actually immune, or could you be a carrier? And the jury's out on that at the moment. They're not 100% sure. So when they talk about immunity passports, it's not as easily cut as that. And secondly, the rates of infection that are showing in antibodies are generally in single-digit percentages. So you have places like Sweden, where Stockholm, where they didn't have a lockdown, the antibody levels are about 7%, and they actually fall down to 2 and 1% in the rural areas in Sweden. So it's not, we don't know if it's an indication. There is a school of thought that says there's T-cell immunology, which means that the body develops its own resistance and it doesn't have any traces of antibodies, but you're actually immune. But again, the science hasn't concluded on that. The next type is the antigen, which looks for a protein in your system, and through a swab, a nasal swab, if you can identify that protein, it's a sure indicator of the presence of COVID-19. And again, the antigen test, there's a lot out there that are up around 99.99% accuracy. So the efficacy is very high. But what a lot of people miss, and I certainly missed it one day, I came running into clinicians and said, there's an antigen test, it's 10 minutes long, you get an instant result, it's 99.999. But then I was schooled in the concept of sensitivity. So the actual test, although it was 99.9% accurate, it has a sensitivity of 85%, which means the test is accurate to 99.9% for 85% of the COVID positive folks. So there's a 15% that walk straight through who are not detected because the sensitivity is too low. So again, there's a lot of nuances there that, and again, this is where the clinicians need to drive the process. So that leaves you with the PCR. There's about 160 different tests of PCR. Our clinicians are led by a lady called Dr. Margot, who's done about 150 tests of 150 different types of PCR. And they're in the shortlist, these folks, with the NHS on the type of PCR that they recommend. And again, you need things like reagents, you need laminar flow labs, and so forth. So a lot of the stuff that we're implementing with the governments we're talking to is having mobile labs in the airport. So there's very little transport between the swab acquisition and the actual testing. So, and that's where a lot of the problems occur, especially in Dubai. As Amery pointed out, we have a very balmy 45 degrees today. So you don't want to be driving around in a motorbike with swabs off to the local hospital in 45 degrees. And of all the sort of, possibilities that happen after that, the misalignment. And there was one national government that mixed up 350,000 swab samples there about a month ago. So the idea is have the testing labs very close. There are PCR tests that are quite quick, relatively quick. There's nothing quick in PCR, but you have to take a DNA extraction. So it takes up to 2 hours or maybe up to 8 hours, depending on the type. So the regimes we have in place is exactly, again, to reference what Amery was talking about in Dubai, it's something very similar. We do the testing on arrival. Now, in an ideal world, you would test at the point of departure and the point of arrival. The problem there is you don't have jurisdiction. And until everybody agrees on a common bilateral or a multilateral solution, you can only treat a test on arrival. But what it does allow you to do is to track, and this is where the technology comes in. You need to track, not necessarily track people's movements, but you need to have a way of communicating with them if they're a positive or a negative outcome. And if it's a positive outcome, you need to be able to figure out who was sitting with them on the aeroplane. So as I mentioned, our background is aviation, so we can tell who was sitting where on the plane. And that really helps. And it also says, here's a traveling group of a family of 4 or whatever, and you can actually isolate them as well. And about 80% or more people are asymptomatic. So they don't actually have any major symptoms. So they can still continue the holiday. But what we work with the government to do is to have a dedicated 5-star hotel, which is solely for the purpose of holding folks who are COVID positive. And they still have their holiday, but it's obviously a lot of provisions in that hotel, especially to protect the staff, etc. And if the symptoms get more serious, then they have to go into medical care. So there's a checkup regime and a follow-up regime. But what it does do is compress the likelihood of allowing what they call the zebra. The medical folks, they call the COVID positive person on the plane the zebra. So it stops the zebra getting through all the gates. The gates get narrower and narrower and narrower till it's actually quite difficult for someone to get out into the wild, as they say, and become a spreader. And that whole regime, as I say, is clinically driven. I can't claim to have any impact on that. We're just a technologist. But basically, having it clinically driven gives us an epidemiology approach to it, where we can say, what is the impact? How many people on the plane are likely to be COVID positive? And what's the impact, and how can we minimize and mitigate the risk, so that we can give our hand on heart that there won't be a second lockdown? Because, as I say, if you go quick into this, and it's a great idea, restart the economy. In fact, I'm even convinced that in some cases, people are taking calculated risks, saying, let's just run the tourist season and see what happens. But it's not a smart way to do it. So what we're really saying, and I shared an article with you, Abdul, is not to promote or what we do, but to share the knowledge we have with anybody and everybody. So the myths are busted, and we kind of focus on the science and be smart about what we do. I was listening to Amery, and I was learning a lot about, there's a huge amount of work goes into just mitigating the risk on the ground in hotels. It's fascinating, the amount of, coverings, and as you say, we're introducing a lot of plastic as well, which is not necessarily a good thing, but we don't really have a choice right now. And it's about just squeezing that risk, so that at the end of the day, we can put our hand on our heart and say that the risk is actually lower than, it needs to be in these situations. And people can start to, gravitate towards a concept of safe tourism. So one of the countries we're working with, we hope to have an announcement in the next few weeks, where we're going to release the idea of safe tourism as a concept and align it with other organizations out there and say, look, here's our blueprint. We want to share it with everybody. We're not just looking to run the global economy or anything like that, but we want to share this model so that other countries can do the same thing, especially small countries who are desperately dependent on tourism. It's an absolute calamity waiting to happen. If we think it's bad now, in 6 months' time, this is a wipeout, because normally what they have is a good summer season, and then they have a quiet winter season in a lot of countries. And at that stage, the income drops off anyway, so there is no tourism for lots of places, especially a lot of the tourist-driven countries tend to be islands, and they tend to be small populations, and the dependency on tourism is massive. It can be up to 80%. I think it was the Maldives or somewhere I read, Amery, you could probably correct me on that, but it's somewhere like the Maldives, where it's literally 85% of revenue comes from tourism. So we have to help them not to make, just knee-jerk reactions. It needs to be scientific. It means it takes a little bit longer, maybe an extra month or two max, but it's a lot safer, because this thing ain't going to go away. And that's a big problem too. There's a secondary effect as well, Abdul. The question you had sent me during the week, I honed in on the word ethical, and you'd mentioned, halal tourism and ethical and morality. There is a role for us to play here in an ethical fashion. Is we got to think of the health workers, the folks that have been absolutely maxed out for the last 6 months. In some cases, people have been living in apartments away from their families to mitigate the risk. They can't afford to have another season and a second spike just because we're careless. We got to really think of those folks. We got to think of the crews on the planes. So myself and my business partner, David Galea, based out of Malta, have been talking to C-level folks in a lot of the airlines, who in a lot of cases, they're national airlines, so they're told when to fly and when not to fly, either by legislation that says, government decision that says it's not safe to fly, but then they're told now you need to fly, but there's no science around the safety of the crew, and they're really concerned about the exposure of the crew. If you're on an aircraft 2-3 times a day, you know, how many cycles do you need to? It's like Amery, you mentioned, I think it's down to 12 rooms a day rather than 15. I think my numbers were correct there, yeah. So in the same with crew on the aircraft, maybe they should have a less taxing regime because there's more staff than they need, and maybe they wouldn't have to lay off too many folks. And basically that way you could you know, lessen the load on the working staff, and also maybe do antibody tests on the staff and crew to see if they've already had COVID. That can be helpful as well as doing regular testing every 2 cycles. That's really important. And the other thing as well, Abdul, is probably very interesting is last year in 2019, there was an average profit across the industry of about 3% in the aviation industry. So airlines made about 3%, as I mentioned earlier, in the good times. So you can imagine how much suffering in the balance sheet and how much distress there is on revenue streams. So I checked, you know, with some folks in the industry about 3 months ago, and some of the revenues were down to 9% compared to the previous year. So actually a 91% decrease in revenues year on year for that particular time. And, you know, that's a wipeout in any industry, and nobody's ever been down this road before. So the problem we're really facing is the bailout of the government has been very welcome, and it's great. Sometimes it's a loan, sometimes it's grants, and sometimes it's just paying staff. But either way, that's going to run out pretty quickly. But the situation hasn't improved. And what you see is a lot of statistics thrown out there in fleets and the amount of aircraft on the ground. If you go to flight radar online, it shows you all the aircraft in the sky. And I mean, you cannot see countries for the aircraft normally when you look at this. And during COVID peak, I went onto that. I saw 2 aircraft over Africa. The whole continent, there was 2 aircraft in the air. Likewise, there was less in other places, but China was starting to come back, and the US really didn't ground as much as anywhere else, but the aircraft were empty. And the problem is there's a lot of optimism around schedules picking up, but what happens is the schedules are published as the best case, and then they wilt as they get closer to the date when flights get cancelled. So we're not really seeing the worst of the cases based on just the schedules that are published by OAG. We're actually seeing the best case, and that actually wilts as we get closer to the dates. So what we want is a regime that gives confidence to tourists, that they can get on a plane and say, I know I'm in a safe environment, and when I land, there will be a methodology applied that keeps the risk very low. There will be sanitation boots. We work, you know, with folks with helmets, and there's some good technology coming out of Hong Kong University and places like that, where they've supplied Hong Kong Airport with helmets where they can see people who are above average body temperature, and they can call them aside and say, look, we want to fast track you on this basis. Some of the stuff that we're doing as well, Abdul, is very important, is around blockchain, where we make sure that the data that's collected is owned and it's managed by the traveler. It's not owned by any centralized organization or any large corporates or techie companies. It's actually owned by the traveler. And the traveler agrees or disagrees, but generally agrees to say, I will release my data if I test positive to the local health authorities in the form of a smart contract. So that means my data is only used when it's needed, and after a certain period of time, that goes away, and that smart contract returns my data to safekeeping and encryption. And I think that's really important, because 65% of Americans, when polled, said they were really unlikely to share their data with the big tech companies because they don't trust them. It's just the way, you know, it's probably underreported, but folks are nervous now because of the Cambridge Analytics and all of the things that happen over the years. There is GDPR, but it seems to be very flaunted by a lot of organizations who say it's better to plead, you know, apologies 6 months down the road, having made the money on the data. So we have to be very careful about that, and that's something very close to my heart. So that's why we use distributed ledgers or blockchain type technology to protect people's data. That's very, very important.
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, no, I just would like to know, because you've mentioned so many important points. For example, for the mobile unit installation at the airports, do you think that the World Health Organization is considering that? Is it something that they have in their mind, maybe in their pipeline in the future, or is it something that maybe it's not being taken care with so much focus?
I don't know if whether it's WHO. Sorry, the short answer is I don't know what their plans are, because they're more an advisory body than an action body. So they give advisory really to direct people. So you've got to advocate for these things with WHO, and then they say, yeah, we like that. And they have to be very careful what they propose, because people listen to them and they act upon them. So they have to, and we all know that we're all finding our way in the dark here, because nobody's really had experience in this kind of a pandemic. So there is a thought, though, a clinically driven, smart way to deal with it, and that's put the labs as close as possible to the testing point. So that is very solid, but it needs to be a lab that's level 2, laminar flow. It needs to be a fully scientific unit. It can't be something, and it needs to be manned by trained personnel. So that's something that needs to be driven by the Ministry of Health. It is the smart thing to do. You can get these labs around the world. There's many suppliers, UK, Turkey, US. There's folks that make them out there, and they all have to meet FDA and CE standards. So they are tested, and it's just the right thing to do. It's a smart thing to do. We're not exclusive on that, and we do recommend that everybody does do it, because from a clinical point of view, there's no downsides. And they can be stacked as well. For each of these labs, you could probably handle about 5,000 to 6,000 people a day. So depending on the size of the airport, you would stack these things. So you could stack 4 of them on top of each other and have a comfortable flow of 20,000 people a day through that airport, for example. And then there's ports and there's points of entry. Now, what I will add is there's a couple of antigen tests coming out, which are promising, but again, the sensitivities are a little bit low, but they're starting to increase. The sensitivities of antigens, when they hit about 95%, then we'll have rapid on-the-spot tests that don't require labs, but we're not there yet. But this will mean that the infrastructure it doesn't need to be permanent, but there is a sense in doing it right straight away, immediately, because of the need. So it is something that's wise to do. They're not very expensive, these labs. The other thing we're looking at is, in one particular country, they have a number of border crossing points. So they have mobile labs that operate between 2 border points. Basically, it's a Mercedes truck with an internal laminar flow level 2 lab inside, and it can operate from 2 points, or we can move the swabs between the crossing points.
Okay, that's interesting. And would that be for the departure airport? So if I'm traveling, it will be in the departure airport or in the arrival airport?
So this is where stakeholder management comes in, Abdul. It's a really, really good question. So we would have proposed day 1, the airport of origin or the port of origin you would test, and you would also test on arrival. So nobody would get on the plane who's COVID positive, but it's getting one jurisdiction to agree with another. So you're asking one jurisdiction to spend the money to the benefit of the other jurisdiction, and that's a difficult one. It's not that it's not possible. It takes a bit of leadership on both sides. And the simple thing is, if both countries agree, we'll test our guys heading to your country, but you test your guys coming to us, which makes a lot of sense. So that's the ideal case. We have modeled that case, and we've also modeled the case where you just test on arrival. So test on arrival is the bare minimum, but it's also very effective because most people are asymptomatic. The COVID infection rates, based on some hard figures, you're looking at the average size of an aircraft, you're going to have maybe maximum 1 COVID positive person on a plane, typically, or 1 on every 2 flights. That's the kind of average we're looking at, 1 in maybe 200 people or more, depending on the source. So we have a grading system for the countries of origin. Level 5, you accept nobody, you cancel all flights. Level 4, it's full testing. Level 3, there's sampling and so forth. Level 2 is a little more gentle. And level 1 is there's no need, because the level of infection in that source country is so low. What we recommend is we operate at level 4 day 1 till we get our arms around this and get the data, so we understand. So we test everybody without exception on road borders, sea borders, and air borders. You don't want leakage. You want a consistent, safe tourism approach. And if your economy really does depend on tourism, and every tourist, I think the average is around $1,000 spend, depending on where they're coming from. Of course, averages are, can be misleading, but let's say an average of $1,000 up or down. It makes sense for a $20 test, to put that in place at the right point, and to have a hotel set aside for those who test positive. Quarantine doesn't work because tourists won't travel, and if it's voluntary, they're going to travel and then they're going to flaunt it. The first night in the bar, that's it. Quarantine is over. Putting people in harnesses and balls and chains and electronic, satellites tracking them and stuff like that is a little bit invasive, I think. And I don't think you need to go that far. And I think what you need to do is have a light touch app, which volunteers information when you test positive. Use a traffic light system. You're green when you test negative. You're red when you test positive, and you're amber when you've known to be in contact with someone who was positive. Even though your test is negative, you may be incubating or whatever. So you test again in a few hours, 48 hours or 2 days or something like that. So it's just managing very gently. Does people still enjoy the experience? I'm sure, Amy, you want folks to come to your hotel there in Movenpick. Is a beautiful location that you have down by the sea. I was there yesterday. Absolutely amazing part of the world. The beaches are all empty. There's a sprinkling of people on the beaches, and the water was like a bath. So you want folks to come and enjoy that, and you don't want them to be completely overburdened by so many procedures, and you don't want them in hazmat suits, just to have a buffet. Or sorry, you don't have buffets now, but to have a meal, that they can actually enjoy and interact with folks.
Yeah, very interesting. It has been very eye-opening, I would say, and I think also a note for the governments and airlines as well to take this really, really seriously, because these are really, really good propositions. I would, because we are just also ending our session, I would ask Amery. Amery, do you foresee many bookings till the end of the year?
Look, because the airports have just opened up, it's a little slow. We get a lot of leisure business being by the beach. I mean, most of Dubai, we do rely on international travel. About 85% of our visitors for all hotels are international. So the more borders open up, the more we will start to see bookings. There's not a lot of interest in the next couple of months, but we're starting to see some really good interest for October on. And first quarter next year looks really good. Like we say, really good off of a very low base. But we're starting to see inquiries for groups and for meetings. And, I think as Brendan said, we're humans and we want to interact with people. We want to connect with people. And I think once people are more aware, I think what you're doing, Abdul, in having this webinar is helping people get educated. Like I've learned so much from Brendan today. About airlines and what they're considering, and because I love to travel, but I do think, okay, how's it going to be? Maybe I'll let somebody else go first and see if they survive. And I think that if I'm an avid traveler and I have that, then that must be a common feeling. So I think that once we start seeing travelers and we start hearing with the bloggers are traveling again and influencers are traveling again, and they start saying, yeah, it was a little bit inconvenient, but it was for our safety. And once that message gets out, I think that people will go, okay, I'm ready to travel because I am itching for a new experience. Like we're all so sick of our living rooms. So I come back once we see a few early adopters.
And I look forward also to visit Dubai. To finalize, Amery, what's your favorite holiday destination?
Everybody who knows me knows that I have a very special place in my heart for Egypt. So okay. I love Egypt. I love history. I love ancient history. And if anybody hasn't discovered the mysteries of Egypt, man, there's some really fascinating travel waiting for you.
Great. Brendan.
I'm just looking at the comments here. There's a chap there by the name of Ahmed Ali who welcomes everybody to his beautiful Gilgit in the north of Pakistan. My wife is from Pakistan and I know Pakistan quite well. I haven't been to Gilgit, But Ahmed Ali, I may see you there someday because I believe it's absolutely stunning in that part of the world. So I hope to get there one day. But to answer your question on the places that I have been where I can refer to, I have a little tiny gem in the southwest of Ireland in a place called West Kerry. And my mum's family, the Kennedys, hail from there. It's a Gaelic-speaking area. They still speak their traditional language for the last 5,000 years. They still haven't got onto English yet. The truth is they speak English better than the rest of us, by the way. They're poets and writers and singers and everything. But their native Gaelic is a beautiful language. It's a very ancient language, similar to Arabic and Urdu, by the way. But that neck of the woods it's just magic. Every time I go there, and I missed a trip this year. My mum went with some of my siblings. When we travel, we usually travel with all 9 siblings and 25 grandchildren, and we book out half the peninsula. But my mum always tells us never to bring a jumper or a coat or an anorak or anything. And we always get this glorious sunshine for a week when we go there. She just says she has control over the weather down there, you know. It's a magical place. That's where I would retreat if I was offered a flight tomorrow. Myself and Sonia would probably head down there to enjoy it.
Perfect. I think that will be one of the destinations in my list as well. So, Brendan, just be prepared. Maybe I'll touch base with you.
Absolutely. Come with me.
Okay. Folks, thank you very much. Thank you very much for your participation. It was really good to have you both here, Brendan and Amery. And it was a pleasure to have you. And yeah, I mean, hopefully we can organize more events like this. So yeah, it'll be very interesting.
Abdul, can I just say thank you so much for having us on. It was an absolute pleasure, and I hope you gave some value to your listeners. And thanks for organizing all of this.
Thank you as well. Thank you.
Fantastic job, Abdul. And the more we can talk about travel and get people excited to it, the better for everybody, and we can get back to a little bit of normality. But thank you. Very fascinated by what you do, Brendan. So I've had a great session. So thank you, Abdul. Really well.
Thank you, guys. So thank you, everyone, for watching this amazing webinar. I'm confident that this will bring a refreshing strategy for many viewers. And I hope to see everyone again in our next session of the eTourism Revolution Talks. Keep tuned. Thank you, guys, and see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.